it's like to be a human being? Why do you think a human being can tell you what it's like to be God? And yet we define God. Anybody disagrees with us, we just burn them at the stake. That's what our history has been. There's parts of the biblical tradition, parts of the Christian faith that are, frankly, immoral, and we need to say so. Women do not look upon the church with great favor when they've been brutalized by it. The Church of England, our mother church, God bless them, they can have a queen running their realm and a prime minister named Margaret Thatcher, but they can't have a woman bishop. There's something really strange about that. The Bible's opposed to that. Well, the Bible says a woman should not have authority over a man. I'd like to tell you that Margaret Thatcher had a great deal of authority. When I was at Cambridge, the master of our college, Emmanuel College, had been fired by Margaret Thatcher. She had a right good bit of authority over Lord St. John of Farsley, who was, among many things, a pompous arse. That's neither here nor there. I want to make the Christian church a place where people can worship with their minds. And if you don't allow that, the thinking people are going to leave. And all you're going to have left in the church are security-seeking people who don't want their Sunday school God to be disturbed. And that church is doomed. I'm excited about St. Peter's because I think St. Peter's has a chance to be something tremendous. We've got the leadership, both lay leadership and clergy leadership, to do great things. And it's the kind of church that ought to attract the most critical thinking people in our area. And we need to work to make it possible. And that's why I think this adult class, focusing on significant educational opportunities of Bible and theology and history and liturgy, is an essential ingredient. And I am absolutely delighted that Janet has decided to try to revive it. Well, with that homily out of the way, let me turn to this dark period. I put 88 up here because I think that's a significant date. That's the date that church and synagogue separated. That's the date when Christianity moved beyond the boundaries of Judaism. Keep that in mind, because that means that when Paul wrote, there was no such thing as the Christian church. When Mark wrote, when Matthew wrote, and maybe when Luke wrote, there was no such thing as the Christian church separate from the synagogue. John is the only gospel that clearly is written on the other side of the fracture between Christian and Jew, synagogue and church. 88 was the year of the division. Embrace the fact that Jesus was not a Christian. Jesus was a Jew. Paul was not a Christian. Paul was a Jew. We need to put our Christian story into its Jewish context. Now that's my preamble, because the only way I know we can penetrate this place where we have no written records at all, the only place where we can begin to enter that is to recognize that the Christian church was part of the Jewish synagogue. Part of the synagogue. I've never known a synagogue that wasn't Jewish, so that's a little redundant. The Gospels are therefore shaped by the synagogue. Now, if that's true, you ought to be able to find in the Gospels the echoes of the synagogue's life. And if we can pull those out, we have a pretty good idea about a doorway into the years between 30 and 51. The Gospels identify Jesus with the synagogue over and over and over again. He's always going to the synagogue, as was his custom. The Gospels locate the events of Jesus' life in terms of synagogue worship traditions. When did the crucifixion occur? At the time of Passover. Is that history? No, I don't think so. I think that's liturgy. I think the Passover began to interpret the death of Jesus, and so they merged together. There are a lot of things that suggest the crucifixion probably took place in the fall of the year. What are they? They're things you know about. A week before the crucifixion, we say Jesus entered into Jerusalem. And the people waved what? Palm. That's what you think. It's not right. It's only palms when you get to the fourth gospel. They waved leafy branches in Mark. The only trouble is there were no leafy branches in late March in Palestine to wave. Now when Matthew comes along, he's got Mark in front of him, he sees these leafy branches, and he sort of knows that's a problem, so he takes the leaves off. In Matthew, they only wave sticks. They only wave branches, no leaves are on. Well, the only thing that waves are the leaves. When you get to Luke, both the branches and the leaves have disappeared. And all they do is throw their clothes down in front of you. People don't see the distinctions in the Gospels. And only when you get to John do they turn into palm branches. So our tradition is a sort of late developing tradition. So there's a suggestion that maybe the crucifixion didn't come in the spring of the year because there were no leafy branches to wave. One other reference. I spent a lot of time on this when I wrote a book called Liberating the Gospels, reading the Bible with Jewish eyes, which I still think is the best book I've ever written. One other example. If you read Mark, the first gospel, you'll discover that Jesus comes into Jerusalem triumphantly, and he cleanses the temple, and he retires to Bethany. And then he comes back up to Jerusalem the next day. And Mark says he's hungry. And he sees a fig tree. And he goes to the fig tree to get some figs. Fig tree doesn't have any figs because fig trees don't have fruit in the northern hemisphere in March. So what does Jesus do? He lays a curse on the blessed fig tree. Is that fair? Is that Jesus-like? That'd be like me laying a curse on Bill Keel because he can't have a baby. You know, there's some things that even you can't overcome with miraculous power. I can't have a baby. Bill Keel can't have a baby. Charlie Trinick can't have a baby. We just aren't equipped to do that. Well, fig trees aren't equipped to produce figs in March, not in the northern hemisphere. And so here's the strange story. The time of the crucifixion, Jesus laying a curse on a fig tree because it doesn't have any figs. Now, if that had been in the fall, then at least it would have taken the scandal away from that. So maybe the combination of the crucifixion with the observance of Passover was a liturgical connection, not an historical connection. But we begin to know, if you read the Gospels carefully, you'll find that the Jesus story is constantly being related to Jewish worship practices and to Jewish scriptures. Open the first Gospel, Mark. Read the first sentence. The beginning of the Gospel of Jesus Christ, the Son of God, as it is written in the prophets. And then he quotes Malachi and Isaiah. By the time you get the first verse of the first Gospel, you find that Jesus has been interpreted in, wrapped around the scriptures of the Jewish people. John the Baptist is introduced next. And John the Baptist isn't a figure of history by the time Mark introduces it. Because the only things you learn about John the Baptist are that he was in the wilderness, that he wore garments made of camel's hair, and he ate locusts and wild honey. Well, you're not Jews, so that's not familiar to you. But if you were Jewish people familiar with the Jewish scriptures, you would know that John the Baptist, the first time he appears in the Christian tradition, has been given the coloration of the prophet Elijah, who lived in the wilderness, who wore a girdle of camel's hair and who ate a diet of locusts and wild honey. Jewish people would have known that. So they would have known that John the Baptist is being portrayed as Elijah. Why? Because there was a tradition that Elijah had to come before the Messiah. And so John the Baptist is going to be interpreted by Mark as the Elijah figure who introduces the Messiah figure. And he's going to make the case that Jesus is the Messiah figure. So John the Baptist is interpreted before you read the first verse of the Gospel. And Jesus is sort of wrapped in all of these symbols.